Hello, welcome to the latest Ask Andy Question Time event. So these happen every month, and it's the chance for anybody to come along and ask the Mayor of Greater Manchester any questions that they want to. We're also broadcasting live on Facebook and on Twitter. You can get involved yourselves there. You can use the hashtag AskAndy on Twitter, or you can just put your questions below in the comments box, and we'll try and read a few of them out. Plenty of questions from the audience as well. So we'll just go straight into the first one. I think I've got Margaret here who's going to talk to us about homelessness. Where's Margaret? Margaret, ask your question, please.
Andy, Andy, I was wondering if you could tell us exactly what provision are we making for the homeless going forward into the winter? And are we really seeing a step change now?
Yeah. Thanks, Margaret. I'm going to come to your question in a second, just to thank you, Matt, for hosting this tonight, and everybody for coming. It's very disconcerting for me being in this position, talking to you from here, because I saw the Smiths here in 1986 on the Queen is Dead tour, and to be doing this event is a little... anyway, I'll reconcile the difference between those two things as the night goes on. Well, it's the right question to ask, Margaret, at this particular moment in time. Of course, everybody will have seen the news that we had over the weekend, the really difficult, disturbing news that two people, both of whom we believe to be people who've been sleeping rough in the city centre, passed away. It just, again, brings home the scale of the crisis. I've called it a humanitarian crisis. I'm going to carry on calling it that, because that is what it is, in my view. It's on our own streets. It's not in some other country. It's right here. The answer to your question is we are about to take a step that is a major step towards the delivery of the commitment made around eliminating rough sleeping and the need for it. So from next Thursday, we will launch what we call a bed every night. Running from the 1st of November to the end of March, we are going to put the funds in place, partly public funds, but also funds that we're asking the public to help us with to pay for that major commitment. We have got around 250 identified places that are ready to open come next Thursday, and that provision will run right through the winter. Last year, we tried to do more than we'd done in previous years, because the commitment in law is that you have to open emergency provision when the temperature goes below freezing 3 nights running. And we decided, as Greater Manchester, voluntarily last year, that we would do it every night that the temperature goes below freezing. And the experience was that while that was a step forward, it was still not ideal, because some people were in, then they were out, then they were in, and that's not good. But also for the providers of that accommodation, it's not good. And the feedback that came back was, let's see now, can we take a big step and say every night the provision is there? And it was partly informed by our experience of the very prolonged cold spell, the beast from the east, because the feedback from a lot of the organisations we work with was that when that hit, and when people were in the same place for a fortnight, they really then could work with people and start to sort of signpost them towards the different options. So Greater Manchester is taking a step that nowhere else is taking. It's the result of our Greater Manchester Homelessness Action Network that meets in this room, all of the organisations that have pulled together, that are taking on this issue as a collective of organisations. They were the ones who endorsed this programme. We're going to do it, and I am hoping that this is the first stage of saying that no one sleeps rough in Greater Manchester, that we will always put in place somewhere for them to go.
Margaret. Just if you've still got the microphone, just any thoughts on what Andy just said there?
That's excellent news. You're absolutely right. Last year was a very difficult time, and it was great to see that Greater Manchester really had a passion to make a difference to people's lives. So seeing the step change going forward, I think it's just we need to be able to cascade that message across the rest of the country, really. We want other people who are in disadvantaged states in different cities to be able to have the same opportunities going forward. But I think long term, it's looking at how do we get housing and stop rough sleeping totally. And that's what I'd like to see.
Well, I'm very lucky, I'm hugely supported, most of all, by the City Mayor of Salford, who leads for Greater Manchester on housing and homelessness. So I've had the support of Paul and the other 9 councils, the NHS, all of the public services across Greater Manchester have signed up to what we're trying to do. And we do believe that change will begin to come from the bottom up through devolution. Because if we do it this year, there will then be pressure, won't there, from other places to say, well, hang on, they're doing it, why can't it be done here in this city? And that's what we want to see. We want to see other cities doing the same as us. In a different way, we had an example recently with Lloyds Bank, where they'd approached me saying, what could they do? And we said, well, look, you could do one very big thing for us, which is let people with no address open bank accounts. And to be fair to them, they went away and they got through all of the regulatory issues, and they've done it, to be fair to them. And they've got, on Market Street now, they've got a cafe that's directly supporting Barnabas, who are one of our city centre organisations. And I've been inundated with people I've since said, how on earth did you do that? Why, and it's now creating a pressure on banks everywhere to do the same. So there is absolutely no reason why what we're doing here can't create a bottom-up pressure to get a much better response to the crisis of rough sleeping across the country, and I hope very much that is what it does.
Andy, in terms of results, this has been obviously a major manifesto pledge. It's something you've been working on for all the time since you've been elected, but the numbers of rough sleepers has been going up. So can Greater Manchester do this kind of thing on its own when it isn't homelessness more of a national problem, because people do move around all over the country?
So a couple of things there, Matt. I mean, it is a fair comment based on last year's headcount, because there's an annual count and the figures had gone up last year, no getting away from that. But I go out around the city centre on a regular basis with an outreach team, and our impression now is some of the things that we're doing are helping. The last time we did the walkabout was on World Homelessness Day a couple of weeks ago, and the consensus of everybody out on the walk, and it's, bear in mind, no one's sort of trying to varnish, and I think there's no point, was that there had been a significant reduction, and we're hoping that will be sustained. The issue we've got, if I'm honest with you, is that the nighttime and early morning position in city centre Manchester doesn't necessarily look like the daytime position, and I think the Chief Constable would be able to explain more about that, because not everybody out on the street appearing to be homeless during the daytime is actually without an address. I think that is just a fact. It's not callous to say it, it is just a fact. So I still think there's a kind of mix in the public mind here of what the real, they see the daytime position and think that is the rough sleeping position. And I'm pretty confident in saying to you that it's not, but I'm not wanting to appear at all complacent here in saying that it's fine and we've got it. It's not, it's far too high still, and there's more we need to do to bring it down. But I believe it is coming down from what I have seen on the regular walkabouts that I've done ever since I was elected. On the point about, are we kind of almost, by doing more, inviting more people to come here? Well, maybe, but I've always said that's no reason not to do the right thing, is it? And I'm hoping that others will start to do what we're doing. But with a bed every night, we have had to say that it would only be available to people whose last address was in Greater Manchester. We cannot have councils in the south, as they have done, giving train tickets to people as they go up to Manchester. They've got to accept their responsibilities rather than trying to just say, well, it's fine just to put people on a train. That's not fine. They've got to come up with a much better response themselves. But we're doing what we can within what we've got, and I'm confident that the picture is improving, not deteriorating, although obviously I want to see it improve much more.
Obviously, you're welcome to ask your own questions on this as well in the audience. One other thing I'd just like to pick you up on there is you say you'd only help people from Greater Manchester. How would that work? How does someone who's homeless, who's on the street, prove that they live here?
Obviously, there are records that are held by housing providers and others, and I wouldn't want to kind of suggest that there's a whole bureaucracy that's going to be created here. Obviously, what we're trying to do is help people. But at the same time, I want other cities to have an incentive to do it themselves too. So, we can't just say it's everybody from anywhere. We can't, because we haven't got the money to pay for that. What we can say is, we can provide that roof over the head of everybody who is a Greater Manchester resident or was at a Greater Manchester address before. So I think I'm just being honest with you that's we're doing what we can do within the realms of the possible. And I'm more than ready to work with Liverpool City Region or West Yorkshire to manage this amongst ourselves, but it does require all areas to up their game and do something similar.
I think we have a question just from the lady just at the second row from the back. That's right, just wait for the microphone to pop round, thank you.
Thanks. Hi, obviously rough sleeping is a very publicly visible side of homelessness, and I just wondered what progress was being made for preventing homelessness, both for women and also for families who are in private rented sector. I think probably for the first time, the homelessness presentations by families from the private renting sector are kind of hitting the priority list, really. They're the highest number of presentations, and that's a bit of a concern in terms of shortages of social housing, I think. So I wondered what progress was being made about that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely asking the right question, and Paul and I talk a lot about this. I don't know whether Paul wants to come in on this point. You are right that now the single biggest cause of homelessness and rough sleeping in Greater Manchester is eviction from private rented accommodation. And there is growing evidence that landlords in that sector are becoming more restrictive in terms of the way they're operating, and particularly with the arrival of the dreaded universal credit. So, you're absolutely right, and obviously the most vulnerable groups within that are women. There are way too many young women on our streets. The issues that creates in terms of their safety, it's just it's awful to see. I saw a woman, young woman. She was with her partner, but I think I'm right in saying about 3-4 months pregnant on the streets. Not the last walkabout, but the one before. I mean, what's going on here? This is just wrong on every level. I think we are turning our attention, Paul and I and the other leaders, to the whole question of temporary accommodation. Those people who are that one final step away from the streets. The quality of some of that is appalling. And I think we need to shine a much stronger spotlight on that. Actually, as the Manchester Evening News recently did, and credit to them for doing that, but there's a bigger story there that we need to get a hold of. And as we get more of a grip on the immediate problem in front of our eyes, i.e. levels of rough sleeping, I think we do need to start sort of shining the spotlight elsewhere, further up the system. And Paul and I are really clear that Greater Manchester needs to adopt a more challenging agenda with the private rented sector across Greater Manchester. They are still raking in many millions of pounds through public money through properties that they don't keep up to a basic standard fit for human habitation. Now, how can that possibly be right? How can they be in receipt of public money in respect of tenants which they then don't use in any way to secure the safety of those tenants and the health of those children in those properties? It cannot be right. And I think we both feel that the time has come to get after them a bit more. And there are many good landlords, but let's start exposing those who don't do the right thing by their tenants and are only in it for the money that they can get.
Paul, I don't know if there's any thoughts on just how to maybe do that, just to take sort of private landlords to task over what they're doing.
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Is this on? I don't know. Is it on? I can shout. For me, homelessness and rough sleeping is a symptom of a failing system, actually. And it's the system, actually, which is predominantly, in my opinion, responsible for the problems we see. So no-fault evictions, as Andy's already highlighted, are the biggest cause of homelessness within Greater Manchester. In addition to that, you've got welfare reform, and that obviously includes the rollout of universal credit now. But even before the rollout of universal credit, there was lots of other reforms to the welfare system that created this sense of precariousness. Then when we look to housing, what's been happening there? Well, we've been losing stock. We've been losing stock because of regeneration initiatives. We've been losing stock because of conversions to affordable rents, which are often not affordable for people. We've been losing stock because of the right to buy within Greater Manchester. I think it's something like 92,000 homes since 1980 have been purchased in Greater Manchester under right to buy. But also, in addition to this, obviously austerity and how that's played out within councils has had a huge impact on what we see now within Greater Manchester. And the reason why I draw attention to that is because of the loss of supported accommodation within Greater Manchester and how a lot of that has been lost. And you specifically ask about women. Women's refuges, for example, have come under significant pressure as a consequence of cuts to local authorities' budgets. But in addition to what Andy talked about in terms of bed every night, there's lots of other things we're doing as well. So you'll be familiar with the social impact bond. We've had 130 entrenched rough sleepers already taken off the streets of Greater Manchester as a consequence of that. However, what we've had is over 500 referrals into the social impact bond. So our ability to actually supply accommodation and support those people with accommodation is linked to what stock is actually available within Greater Manchester. Then in addition to that, we've got Housing First, which will be rolled out early next year, again targeted at supporting around 400 people within Greater Manchester. So I don't want us to think about this as just a bed every night and getting rough sleepers off the street, because that is absolutely critical and important, but there is a whole strategic approach around this, and we're putting a lot of pressure on government now to build truly affordable housing. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Chancellor says on Monday around housing revenue account caps being lifted, and does that actually mean we can build stock across Greater Manchester, and what our local authority is going to do in terms of responding to that. So
it'd be good to have a Greater Manchester Council house building programme.
Indeed.
If what we're told is coming in the budget is actually in there. But just very quickly, Matt, just to echo Paul's point, please don't see a bed every night as a sticking plaster. It's the first stage of a system that lies behind. So we have got these properties in the SIB, and the SIB is a very successful scheme. It's what we call, well, it is like a housing first scheme, a home and support. And we're going to be able to really increase that capacity early in the new year with our housing first proper scheme. So, you know, we're helping people make a journey away from the streets with provision at every stage. And I just want you to see that this is part of a thought-through strategy, not just a sort of knee-jerk response. You know, we've really gone into detail on this.
There's a question from a gentleman at the back. If you want to just add your question to this mix. And then I think we'll be able to hear from someone who's actually had first-hand experience of this issue with private landlords as well. But firstly, your question, sir.
I just wanted to ask about the development of social housing within new housing developments. When I look out my window, all I can see are cranes. I know that over the last 12 months, The Guardian reviewed new housing developments in Manchester, and the conclusion they came to was that the amount of social housing included was 0, and that they were allowed to get away with that due to a loophole that said something like, if the provision of social housing made the entire project non-commercially viable or slightly less forgive me, I can't remember exactly. I'm wondering if the problem is political will in Manchester on the part of the council, or whether it's a national law that effectively needs to be changed.
Andy?
Well, obviously I'm not responsible for individual policies of individual councils, and it would be wrong for me to be sort of, you know, that it's right that they would explain their policy, although I can just say that I think Manchester City Council did dispute that analysis. But the wider point is one I can answer around what the GMCA has funded around big developments in the city centre, many of which we can see taking shape. A housing fund was created as part of the devolution deal, £300 million. And it came with some very, very big strings attached, i.e. it could only be loaned to effectively large private sector organisations. That was the the conditions that Osborne put on it when it was created. It was accepted because it was seen as an opportunity to let those loans, but then when the loans were being repaid, that funding then can be recycled to more affordable housing. Now, that is what Paul has been doing, to be honest, over the last year, is recycling some of that funding as it's kind of coming back to us to schemes that include more affordable units. And I would like to see that, I mean, we both like to see that go even further. So there was a logic to what was being done. It was about getting a system where Greater Manchester could kind of free itself from that bureaucracy that the government had set up, so that when we'd have a fund that would be recycled from these big developments into affordable housing. So there is a kind of better story behind that than it might first appear.
Where's Joanne? Joanne Taylor. Joanne, you've got a really interesting question around sort of the social housing and the private sector. Do you want to just ask your question, please?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Andy.
Hi, nice to meet you.
I am signed off work due to sickness, and so I claim benefits. Disabled people like me have nowhere to turn but to the private rented sector, yet most letting agents and landlords operating in Greater Manchester's private rented sector refuse to rent people like me a home because I claim benefits, even though my references are great and I've always paid my rent on time. Their message to people like me is clear: no DSS. So my question to you today is this: will you join me in publicly challenging this outdated form of prejudice against the poor? Isn't it about time letting agents and landlords in Greater Manchester ended their discriminatory blanket bans on people who claim benefits and said, yes, DSS?
100% yes. And when do we get out there and start making the case? But no, it's the way things seem to be going at the moment, isn't it? This kind of almost this kind of divisive mentality is out there, and it's almost becoming unchallenged, and it's shocking, to be honest, that is being done in this day and age. So absolutely, I think Paul and I both feel we need wholesale reform and regulation of the private rented sector, such that they can never introduce policies like that. So, universal credit is fine sometimes. Oh, well, but not fine any... Well, no, I'm sorry. This is wrong, what they are doing. They should not discriminate in that way. I would fully support your call and any campaign along these lines. And we need, I think, major reform of the private rented sector. It's suiting its own vested interests, and it needs to start serving the wider public interest, which it isn't palpably doing, in my view.
Just got a couple more questions on homelessness. I think there's a gentleman in the red jumper here. Just ask your question.
Hello. Hi, Andy. We met in Stretford, and I gave you a policy document, if you remember, in a folder, exactly about private rented sector.
I do remember, yeah.
And to let the people know, the idea was everybody who rents a house has to have a licence.
Yeah.
Not only
that
that,
idea.
but the licence also comes with the fact that every rented house or flat or whatever has to be videoed, so that every room, defect and everything is actually put on a database so that everybody knows. It was actually designed originally for conflict resolution, so that tenants have an equal method of saying, when the landlord says you don't get your deposit back because this was broken, you can go back to the original database and say, well, actually it wasn't, or it was originally. But it could easily be stretched to the situation where the council then gets control over the rented sector, not only for income tax and other purposes, but they're all fit for purpose. You can't rent unless it is fit for purpose. And you could put restrictions on, not necessarily a single householder, but you could on an agency. You could say, if you've got 20 flats to let, Salford Quays as an example, for whatever, in a whole block, you have to accept DSS as part of your licence. Mm. So many people, exactly the same as the house building, where you say put so many social housing in. Why not do exactly the same thing for the private rented sector and do? It creates a very large database. I'm not going to dispute that, but it means that anybody then who's renting a house, you don't get 10 people in a room, you don't get for argument's sake, immigrants being taken advantage of because somebody will do this, that and the other and they rent the shed to them. Because if they've not got a licence, you take them to court.
I think you know, the time has come for ideas like that, to be honest with you. And we might have to wait some time before there's a national act of Parliament to reform the private rented sector. It will have to come at some point, in my view, because we can't solve the housing crisis without major reform of the private rented sector. But what we could do, and Paul and I are talking about this, is start in a different way here with a GM good landlord scheme, and set the standards that we expect and get those who are prepared to come and do the right thing, and then expose those who clearly aren't prepared to sign up to what are basic, decent standards in terms of the way that they operate. And what I would then like to do, working with the 10 councils and the housing providers, is see if we could then consider compulsory purchase of some of those properties. For me, it's not acceptable anymore to be an absent private landlord, raking in the money, not putting any of it back into the upkeep of the property, leaving the tenants in an unsafe condition, dragging down the whole street and the whole community, and never coming visiting, and that is not acceptable behaviour. If that's the way you want to go, you should get out of Greater Manchester, because we don't want you here.
Why can't we just put the same rules on private landlords you do on the council, housing associations, everybody else?
It's obviously because of a lack of national legislation that enables that at the moment. So we have to look at more creative, voluntary ways of doing that. And some councils are looking at licensing schemes. It's whether we, from the GM level, could add some weight to those efforts by giving a GM sort of standard or scheme. But I think the time, if I'm honest with you, my immediate focus has been on rough sleeping and homelessness. I'll just be honest, it has. But as I was saying to the lady near the back, as we sort of get more of a grip on that stuff, we have to turn the spotlight to temporary accommodation, the private rented sector, and that's where it's heading right now.
People who rent out really bad accommodation, or as you say, stick 10 people in a room, they're often doing it because there are people who are desperate for places to live and they don't have many other options. Wouldn't that kind of landlord not bother being in a good landlord scheme? There would be no point to it.
That's true, Matt. No, probably not. But at least it would say to councils like Salford, right, well, here's the ones that won't sign up to what, so maybe these are the ones we should all spend more time looking at and challenging and actually looking at what they're doing. And are they meeting the health and safety legislation? And is it Jim and Tony from the fire service, could we ask the fire service to pay more attention to these properties where the landlords in question won't sign up to a basic set of decent standards? Jim and I, the new fire chief, we had this discussion last week, and I was saying, as we're kind of reviewing the fire service going forward, post Grenfell, don't we need to get back on basic fire safety of homes across all of our cities, but particularly this one? I think we do. And if we have people living in homes that aren't fire safe, well, we need to get after those people in a more direct and challenging way. And I think we're ready to do that. It's been a capacity issue to this point, but I think we both feel, don't we, that the time has come for a much more assertive approach on this crucial issue.
We have, of course, on Facebook Live at the moment as well. We've got a question on there from Marcus. This is just going back to the point around this sort of, there's homelessness, there's rough sleeping, and there's begging, and there are three different things, but they're all sort of linked together. And Marcus says, why, unlike other places, have you not created no begging zones in Greater Manchester?
I mean, I don't know whether the Chief Constable would want to come in on this point at times. I mean, I've set the tone in saying that it's not a criminal. If you are homeless, you are in a desperate situation, and if you start, as other places have done, criminalising that, then I think you're going down a very bad path, in my view. There's a difference, though, of course, between people who are truly homeless and those who might be kind of presenting as homeless to organise begging on the streets. Now, it's true to say, and I think Ian might want to come in on this, there is evidence of the latter. And I think it does no benefit to the cause of those who are truly in need, for that behaviour to go unchallenged. But I think it's got to be done carefully, and I think it's got to be done in the right way. I don't think we want a situation where people are being criminalised because they've got no home to go to, because life has dealt them a kind of hand of cards that has been a really bad one, and they've perhaps suffered from mental health problems, trauma in the past. I've also said to Ian and GMP, if they're taking spice, well, many people might want to kind of escape. They're escaping something, aren't they? They're trying to kind of get out. They're trying to escape the pain of something that has happened. Now, I would much rather get after the manufacturers and the dealers that are causing that misery on the streets, rather than people who are in an unfortunate position. But as we go forward, I think a distinction does need to be made between people who are truly without somewhere to go and those who are exploiting the public concern about the issue to raise money on the streets. And I think, it's not harsh to make that distinction, because honestly, those posing as homeless who actually have an address, and I think GMP would say those people are there, they are taking precious pounds that could be put to the whole cause of challenging rough sleeping and bringing an end to it. And some of that money is ending up in the hands of those who are perpetuating misery in the lives of those on the streets of the city centre and elsewhere. So we do have to draw that distinction. Just one point before, maybe I'll just ask Ian to say something. It's been hard to draw that distinction when people didn't have somewhere to go. So when we couldn't kind of say with confidence that there is a place for everyone to go every night. And I couldn't give a tougher message to the public about on-street giving when that wasn't the case. Because if people had nowhere to go, it's understandable that somebody would go and put some money in their hand or buy them a sandwich or a coffee or whatever. But now that we are getting in a position where we can say there is provision, I think we can say more to the public, look, giving on the street doesn't necessarily help matters. It can actually make things worse in some cases. And I think we need to start to toughen that message a little bit as a bed every night provision comes through.
Chief Constable, if you want to add to this, just quickly, you're saying there is an issue here. How do you work out who's genuine and who isn't?
I'm fully supportive of what Andy's saying, and there's multiple levels to this. So there's clearly opportunist criminals that are coming and begging and preying on the good nature of the citizens of Greater Manchester, to be quite honest. And frankly, we do see the problem increase towards Christmas. So Andy's right about the message of saying, please, don't give to charities, give to the Homelessness Fund, give somebody a cup of tea or some food rather than giving them money. The other level of it is there is an element of organised crime. And we've done a huge amount to tackle organised crime across Greater Manchester, and in particular some of the stuff around modern slavery and human trafficking. And we are seeing people that are being forced to beg on the streets by organised crime gangs. So our strategy is always to target the ones where we've got information and intelligence that they are coming in to the city centre in particular to gather money in a criminal way, and not to target the ones that are rough sleeping. Now, the distinction is, there's roughly 120 people that are rough sleeping in the city centre at any one time. And the team that Manchester City Council have, that the police work alongside, we know who they are. So we can distinguish between the two. And I've said to the Reform Board that Andy chairs in the past, criminalising those is hopeless for all of us, because if we've arrested them for begging in the morning, they go to court in the afternoon and they get a fine and they're on the street again by the evening in a worse position than they were at the beginning of the day. So it is a complex picture, but please be assured that those that are behaving in a criminal way, whether that's aggressive begging or whether it's because they're being forced to beg, for criminal means, then we will target them. And just again to reassure you, my strategy has always been around the spice in the city centre, that we go after the dealers because they're preying on some of the most vulnerable people in our society. We're having some real success with that, backed up by the courts, I have to say. We did a session about 15 months ago with both the Crown Court judges from Minchell Street and from Manchester Crown Court, and they've been hugely supportive in terms of when we're putting people before the courts, some really good sentences being handed out.
Thank you very much. We're just going to move on to the next topic. We've done 40 minutes, can you believe, on homelessness? But I think it's really worth getting into in detail, and thanks for all the comments from the audience as well.
I was going to say it reduces the time we spend on transport, which is probably, but then I probably shouldn't. I probably shouldn't say that, should I? But
Alan Hughes is here to burst your bubble, Alan.
I thought so.
Do we have Alan? Oh.
Hello, Andy.
Oh, yeah,
what do you think about the travel disruption on Regent Road for the next 12 months?
There you go. Off you go.
Thank you. Obviously, it's a really kind of difficult situation for everyone. I know everyone's fed up, everyone's frustrated. In terms of that work particularly, it has to be done because, Regent Road and those junctions as you go in towards town have been, a bottleneck for as long as we can remember. And so the way I would put it is the quicker we get that done, the quicker the improvements to those junctions will be made, and therefore the quicker we'll have the benefits of those expanded roads and those junctions. But it's really difficult. I'm not going to, kind of say otherwise. And the thing that I think is kind of the thing that tips us over the edge is the chaos on the railways, because more people have gone back to their cars. So it can be bad, as we all know, when there's essential roadworks being done in the city centre or here in Salford. But with the extra pressure this year of a collapsing rail industry that is quite frankly shamelessly failing the public, in my view, that is when you get this perfect storm that's breaking over us as we have right now. And as I've said today, to be honest with you, I'm 18 months into this role. I'm doing what I can, but I honestly don't have control of the levers that will help to get a grip on this system, and particularly with the rail industry. This year I have challenged them repeatedly, but they're just not accountable to the travelling public. They're all collecting their sky-high salaries and they're all working 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Well, I'm sorry, we need a 7-day rail service, and it's not good enough for them just to say, well, we can't provide it on a Sunday anymore, as they seem to have been saying for the last few months. It's a pretty appalling state of affairs, and I think the roadworks just kind of add to that. But I think if you look at it all round, it's a system that urgently needs reform, and we need a public transport system here that Greater Manchester controls, so that we can then put the public interest first and what matters to our residents here. And the call I've made today on the government is, 18 months in, give Greater Manchester the same powers as the Mayor of London has to run the transport system.
Alan, what do you think about the travel disruption?
Frustration with a lot of people is the management of it. On match days alone, 3 hours for a coach to get from Victoria to Manchester United's ground. I mean, it's like me on Sunday, from where I normally go to a friend's, I can do it in 15, 20 minutes. I was stuck for an hour, and that's on a Sunday. Some people being stuck on normal days for 2 hours. And it's just that there's no signage, there's nothing. The management of it is frustrating to a lot of people. Same with people that need, public transport. One bus that goes down Regent Road. When I was a young lad, we used to have 5. One bus that serves a lot down Regent Road. And like you say, the whole transport structure for Greater Manchester, like you say, London, they get vast amount of money, for all their projects. HS2, when's that ever going to get started? That was the big thing. Getting the systems better to Leeds and Liverpool, connections, it needs to happen, and we need the investment. That's the biggest problem.
The management of those roadworks, that is locally managed though, isn't it? That's up to, especially Regent Road, that's Manchester Council. It's nothing to do with national government.
That's absolutely true, and I'll answer that point. But I was just thinking as you were talking about match days, I'm hoping to avoid Jose for a few weeks, because I'm not sure that'll be an easy conversation. But seriously, well, I think Everton are there on Sunday, so anyway, maybe I'm going to bump into him before I know it. But seriously, I think we all recognise that the pressure on the system is intense at the moment for all of the reasons that you give. We've got to, as well as me challenging the government, I've said in the media today, we've got to hold our hands up as well and say, look, Greater Manchester needs to raise its game as well. Is there more that we can do? And we've just been having a meeting a minute or so ago about better coordinating across R10 in terms of what we're doing. So we recognise that as well. A hard look has been taken at what's being done. Obviously, Greater Manchester gave Manchester City Council a budget to run these works. We're not flush with public money, as you might know at the moment, so we can't do all the evening working, all the weekend working, although they are now, I think, looking to work more on Saturdays, and they've said recently they're going to try and pull the works forward by a month. It's a difficult situation, but what Transport for Greater Manchester are here tonight, and at my request, they also looked about what more could be done, because you're saying, well, the buses aren't there to help us. We have put more buses on the V1 and V2 and V3. So we put some on earlier this year, and we've announced today that there'll be 2 extra services on the V1, I think. 2 extra buses operating on the V1 to add more peak and evening time capacity, and that will obviously provide more, particularly for Salford residents. That'll mean hopefully more spare seats as they're coming into town. But it's not ideal, and I'm not going to begin to claim to you tonight that it is. It's not. All I've got to try and do is face it up and be an advocate for you. We are treated as second-class citizens when it comes to transport. Grayling has been talking about Thameslink, and that's his big priority, and they're on a warning, and they're going to get potentially the franchise taken off them. Thameslink have been performing better this year than Northern and TransPennine. TransPennine were down to 34% of trains running on time on Monday this week. 34 on time, 2/3 of their trains were not running to time. That was Monday this week. And yet, there's nothing said about them. It's like the pain of passengers in the north is not equal to the pain of passengers in the south. As I say, we're treated as second-class citizens when it comes to transport. And I will continue to challenge them. The one thing I can be for all of you is a voice, and I'm trying to use my voice as best I can to challenge that approach to transport, where the north is always at the back of the queue for everything.
Andy, how bad does it have to get before you say these operators, TransPennine, Northern, must lose their licence to operate here?
Well, I have said that. That we cannot allow them to inflict their miserable services on us on a kind of ongoing basis. We just can't allow it. The havoc they've caused in people's lives.
Both TransPennine and Northern should lose their franchise.
So what I've said, just to explain it really clearly, and this is where the rail industry gets very, very frustrating, an argument goes on internally where the operators say, oh, it's Network Rail's fault, it's not our fault. And then they say back, it's, you get this kind of... And then how can you hold all that accountable? It doesn't matter, does it? We don't. The reality is they're all failing us. But in this case, I'm afraid that there is a bit of an argument that Network Rail have caused some of this problem with the overrunning of these works between Manchester to Preston, going through Bolton. And Bolton people, to be honest with you, they've had the worst of it all. They really have. It's been shocking for them. But that argument goes on. And, you can only kind of go after the operators when you know what, that they're really sort of failing. I believe they are, because if everyone remembers back to before this timetable debacle happened, Northern were poor anyway. They were failing going way back, and they've clearly got no resilience in their system. So there's no ability to improve things or kind of put on extra staff when things are going wrong. What they have promised me at the Transport for the North Board is that when the Bolton line opens in December, things will get better. And then when the new timetable comes in from May, things will get a lot better. And then they'll be back up to where they should be in terms of their franchise. Now, I've said to the Transport Secretary today, I want him to issue the same warning to them that he has done to Thameslink, because in the end, he is the only one who can take the franchise away. And I want him to put them on notice, on warning, that if things don't get better in December, and then again in May, that is what will happen. Because I am not prepared to let them ruin people's lives any longer. And after a kind of what feels like a year now of kind of raising concerns, we've just had almost, had nothing back. This is an unaccountable industry that's failing the public. They're pocketing sky-high salaries in the process. It can't be allowed to carry on. And actually, we should renationalise them.
Okay. There seems to be quite a lot of support in the audience. Let's just have a show of hands. Who thinks the railways should be renationalised? Okay, thank you. And who thinks, no, we should just have better operators? One or two. So there's obviously in this room a lot of support for renationalising. Sure, yeah, far away.
When the railway was privatised in 1997, British Rail as it was actually working. It was sectorised into 3 different sectors. It was intercity, regional railways and rail freight. And the railway was actually making money. Why the government then decided to split it up into thousands upon thousands of different little companies is beyond anybody's imagination. I know quite a lot about this because I've worked for the railway for 35 years. And I am a very, very big advocate of renationalising the railway. I do appreciate there's a gentleman here with a blue flag with a lot of yellow stars on it. But in March next year, I hope we get our railway industry back as a British railway industry. I'm not a big advocate of UKIP, but a couple of years ago, their Transport Secretary hit the nail on the head. Once upon a time, we took the railways not only to Europe, but to the world. We're the biggest railway producing country in the world. Now, the world is running our railways, and it needs to stop. I'm sorry, but it needs to stop.
Can I just come back, because I agree, I have to say, with what you're saying, but I have to kind of almost in some ways hold my hands up. Back in the 90s, I was very opposed to rail privatisation, but then I was in a government, and I don't think I spoke up enough to say that it wasn't working. But eventually I did come round to it, and when it came to the point where I stood for the leadership in 2015, alongside Jeremy Corbyn, I did propose nationalisation, because I'd come to the view that it wasn't working. And I respect those who put their hands up with a different view, but I just ask you to think about this. I think our experience here in Greater Manchester, if you look at the railways, but also the buses, can we say that unregulated private markets operate good public transport? I honestly don't think we can. If you're going to run good transport, it seems to me, it needs clear rules laying down about when services go, how they integrate with other services. You need to put the public interest before the profit interest, it seems to me, because the two are not aligned. If you go to a system which lets the market decide, you end up with a situation where you have buses nose to tail on Oxford Road, and you have large parts of my former constituency, Lee, with no service at all. And that is our reality here. We've had 30 years on the buses of rising fares, reducing services, and a bus service run, I think, in the private interest rather than the public interest. And I just have come to the conclusion that public transport should mean what it says. A system run for the public that's affordable, that can integrate with other modes, that goes when we want it, where we want it. And I'm afraid we haven't got that at the moment. And I'm kind of sitting in the position now where I see this chaos and I can't, and I say this in all sincerity, I have tried this year, but I cannot get them to be accountable to you and run what they should be doing for you. They're not listening. They won't kind of pay enough attention. And that's true of the bus companies as well as the rail companies. They won't do what's right for you and earn the money that they're getting. And that's why I've come to the conclusion that renationalisation is the right way to go.
With this issue of renationalisation, just to come back on it a little bit, we've talked about the line through Bolton, which is, I'm originally from Bolton, and it has been awful over the last few months, especially over the summer. Network Rail is practically, in all respects, a public body, non-profit, and it's been largely responsible for that disastrous service along there. So is it really a little bit too simple to say, oh, it's just because of the private sector, the public sector can do a lot better, when you take the example of Network Rail in Bolton?
I think that's a fair comment and question to ask, Matt. But I think they're part of a dysfunctional sector. They just happen to be the public-owned bit of it. But the whole thing doesn't make sense. It's too complex. It's too fragmented, and you can't get the whole thing to make sense. You know, it's one bit's playing another bit off. And in the case of Network Rail, I go back to the gentleman's point at the very back. They, like other bodies regulated by Whitehall departments, I'm afraid, put London and the South East first. And as we know, we don't get transport secretaries making statements in the Commons about what's happening in the North because they don't care enough about it. And so Network Rail are worried about the London bit of their operation, and I think they haven't and don't pay enough attention to what goes on up here. And that is how that whole debacle happened, I think, this year. They weren't accountable enough to people here, and they basically were kind of taking their lead from people down south. And I think that's how they had their eye completely off the ball. And, you know, I've been challenging them and will do till they get it right.
Another question coming in from the Facebook feed. Of course, you guys put your hands up if you want to ask a question about transport as well. This is going back to the roads, saying, Sue says, talking about the state of the roadworks, why can't bus lanes be opened to ease pressures?
I do a nervous laugh there because I've asked the same question of TFGM. I wouldn't support just opening the bus lanes, because I think you lose the kind of incentive to go by public transport. I mean, look, you know, I mentioned it, didn't I? The V1, V2, V3 comes right past this building where we are. You know, it has been an amazing success if you look at passenger volumes. I know people don't, they like to knock it, or they certainly did in my former constituency, but the truth of the matter, it's exceeded all expectations. In September, the V services, Vantage services, carried 67,000 people. That was what they were expected to do in 5 years' time. They're way exceeding what we expected them to do. And part of it is, of course, it's a decent environment that goes down those bus lanes and does it quickly and gets people to where they want to go. If you started to open up the bus lanes, you would kind of mitigate the reasons for why people might go on that service like that, and then maybe people would be back in their cars and we wouldn't be sort of solving things. The one bit that, the reason I laughed was, I wondered whether it would be an idea to give people an incentive if they were doing the right thing, i.e. if people were car sharing, should they be allowed to use the bus lanes? And the TFGM advice, it's fair to say, is that would cause the same effect. It would sort of start to clutter the bus lanes, and you wouldn't then create that clear incentive for people to use public transport. So I've reluctantly had to accept that for now, but I still kind of feel that we need a way of encouraging people, if people change their behaviour by doing the right thing, i.e. car sharing, but then give them a benefit for having done that, which allows them to escape the traffic. The truth is, we're not going to take that forward for now, but we are looking at a much more public-facing car-sharing app across Greater Manchester, where we help people explore that, and that's something that you should be probably hearing more about in due course.
Okay, thanks for the question, Sue. We've got we'll take one more question from the back, and then we've got one more written question on transport, and then we'll rattle through a few other issues for the last half an hour. Yes, please.
Okay, hello, Andy. I'd just like to ask on another form of transport about the Mobike debacle. Are you ashamed of what happened in Greater Manchester about Mobike, given that I think it's the first city that Mobike have taken away their services, and do you see that as something that we could perhaps improve on in the future?
It was certainly disappointing, wasn't it, when we had that news, and there were problems with vandalism. There's no getting away from it. But I don't think, as I looked into it, I don't think we were unique. We really weren't. I was in China a couple of weeks ago. I saw Mobikes scattered everywhere, to be honest. They're like litter in the street. So I don't think they can say that it's uniquely a Greater Manchester problem. What happened was they came in with, let's say, minimal discussions with the councils and TFGM. There was some discussion, but it was all very last minute. And they launched without, I think, doing the proper... This is Chris Boardman's view as well, by the way. They launched without doing the proper homework and really listening to the advice of people who were here. The advice they got was that they should offer a docked kind of station. They shouldn't just offer the freestanding thing, and they wouldn't and didn't listen to that. So we feel they launched without actually listening to some of the considered good advice that they were getting. They kind of came in too quick. And I think some of the mistakes were their fault that they've subsequently tried to blame us for. But yeah, there were problems with vandalism, and that's not good. And there were problems with vandalism on Metrolink and antisocial behaviour, and that's not good either. I am looking at delivering the manifesto commitment I had to bring in a free bus pass for 16 to 18-year-olds. I'm looking to see if I can do that. But what I'm thinking of, and I'm talking to the Deputy Mayor about this, is should we make that a contract with young people? So if they are causing problems, vandalism, antisocial behaviour, and they do it once, twice, 3 times, let's say, as well as giving them that, should we be able to say, well, sorry, no, you can't, to kind of give a stronger sense of rights, responsibilities with younger people. So, it wasn't a great thing, and there was vandalism, but it wasn't as bad as Mobike portrayed it, in my view. But do we need to do more to kind of give all of our young people, a kind of clearer kind of bit of help, but also what we expect from them? Then, yeah, I think we do, and I'm hoping to use the bus pass to that effect.
One more question on transport. Aaron Booth, where are you? Aaron, just wait for the microphone to get to you, and then this is around the issue of public transport and how difficult it is to use different forms of it. Unlike, say, having an Oyster card in London. Do you want to just ask your question, please?
Yep, so I've just moved up to Manchester from London, actually. So one of the first things I've kind of noticed, I guess, is Manchester obviously has a very disparate and dysfunctional public transport system in comparison to Transport for London. And, for example, the Get Me There card is hardly fit for purpose. I think, for me, just in particular on a couple of those things, is I wasn't able to top it up on a bus using a contactless payment card. You have to have cash, so what's the point of it if it's not replacing cash? And you're not able to top it up specifically for a bus-only pass online. It has to be a bus and metro pass. Some of the weird things in the system. And also, just because you mentioned about the, you're going to do another cycle app or car sharing app through the Transport for Greater Manchester. It's currently rated at 1.7 stars out of 5 on the Android App Store. So good luck for your car sharing application. So what are you going to do to work with TFGM to join up transport payments and fix the issues of the current system?
Watch this, I'm going to do the real politician's trick and give the hospital pass to TFGM, I think now, Bob. But I'll just pick up a couple of the themes there quickly, if I could. Again, it goes back to that theme that the gentleman raised at the back. Why can't we have an Oyster like London? It's because we have a fragmented bus system where the operators are all doing what they like. They're all running their own ticketing systems and their own ticket prices. We have something like 300 different ticket regimes in Greater Manchester. That is why you can't make sense of this system for the public benefit, because it's chaotic. And that's really frustrating, you know, when you have to confront that. But we want the power to reform our buses, because we've got Greater Manchester's insistence. A bill went through Parliament, and that was part of the devolution deal. So we are getting that power, we hope. The improvements will come. To make you feel at home, we're moving to a zonal 1 to 4 system for Metrolink in the oh, hopefully this is your home now, by the way. But we are moving to a zonal system for Metrolink come January, which will give people more for their money travelling on the system. It's going contactless from January. From spring, is it? Right, yeah, sorry. Yeah, when does spring start is one of those civil service words, isn't it? Yeah. But, I mean, I think the bit, before I give Bob the difficult questions to answer about the Get Me There app and that, all of that, I think it's right for me in this forum tonight, with everything I've been saying and the way I've been saying it about transport, that we give Transport for Greater Manchester some credit, because by far the most functional bit of the Greater Manchester transport system is Metrolink. And it's largely something that Greater Manchester has built itself without any real help. Okay, some government funding, some European funding, but it's largely done it itself. And, you know, we recognise it's not perfect, but it had its problems early this year, and TFGM stepped forward with the operator, and they got a grip on some of those problems, and we are bringing through improvements. So, you know, I think credit where it's due. It's a pretty decent system within the constraints in which they're operating. But now, Bob, the Get Me There app, I'll...
Thanks for that, Andy. Yes, Get Me There has had some false starts. We went out for an all singing, all dancing, very similar to the Oyster card in London, to the private sector. We awarded a major contract, and in the end, that company was unable to provide the service, so we had to withdraw. We got fully compensated for that, but that didn't mean we had the product we wanted. So since then, we've started again. As Andy said, the bit we have got the control of, Metrolink, in the new year, you will start to see the real benefits. And it will start to become that all singing, all dancing card we all deserve. At present, we're not there. It's taken longer than anybody would like, but we are going to get me there.
Aaron, 1.7 stars for the app. How many stars would you give for the answer? You don't have to answer that.
I was just picking up on nationalisation. Was there a particular reason why TFGM didn't want to deliver that in-house instead of contracting that out to a provider?
Probably one for you again, Bob.
If you can hear me, we just haven't got the level of technical...
I think we've got a microphone just coming around, yeah.
Thank you. We just haven't got the levels of technical capability in-house. It was a major global company that had hundreds of technicians and engineers working on it, and they still couldn't do it. We have a very small, informed client type of resource, so it would be well beyond our capabilities to actually build it.
Okay, we're going to just move away from transport for the last 20 minutes or so, just to get through a couple of other issues. Maybe we shouldn't, if you've really decided to leave. No, it would be nice to get a couple of things. We've got John, who's got a question. He's asking about the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. If you don't know what that is...
Can we go back to transport?
This is the thorny question of where we're going to put tens of thousands of new homes. We should get an answer, I think it's the end of next month. But what's your question about it?
Good evening, Mr. Burnham. In the first GMS draft, there was mostly greenbelt allocated for development. With the rethink of this GSMF, how much reduction of the greenbelt allocation are you looking to be in the second version?
Well, I did promise, going back to the mayoral election, a radical rewrite, and I can confirm that that is what we have been on with. It's a challenging process. I did say at the time that there still will be difficult decisions, and I couldn't promise to eradicate all greenbelt use. I said we should try and aim to see if we can get to a position of no net loss, but I didn't. It's obviously always politicians have to make these kind of couched statements, because I didn't know, I hadn't seen the full picture at that point. I wasn't obviously in office at that point. But I did say in the campaign that, you know, we would have some difficult decisions. However, you know, I'm looking at a major reduction in the Greenbelt take, and that is what I'm on with achieving. At the same time, I've got to be clear that we need a plan for growth in Greater Manchester in terms of the number of our houses, the jobs that we're bringing in. And it's that balance that I'm trying to strike. But I'm trying to look you in the eye as far as I can see you here and say, I am clear that there has to be a major reduction in the Greenbelt take. What I can't say to you tonight is that means that there is no take, because, you know, that could damage the development and the growth ambitions of Greater Manchester. What I'm trying to do is get to the right point of balance, and Paul and I, again, this is something we're working on together.
Well, that's good, it's going the right way. But with the Office of National Statistics now saying that they need less housing in the country, particularly in this region, they've recalculated the figures, that will mean you could even release less of Greenbelt for building.
That's true for those that, and Paul, come in by all means in a mo, but just to explain, they have revised some of their calculations recently, and that, as you say, has kind of taken the figure down. However, the government is saying it's going to bring forward a new methodology, as they describe it, to add to those figures, and we've been reliably told that the number's going to go back up. So when we get to a position where the plan gets challenged, because it can get challenged from two ways, by the way. It can get challenged from, let's say, Greenbelt campaigners on the one hand, or the planning industry, the development industry on the other. You have to kind of give cognizance to that government target wherever it comes out. So, you know, we're in the middle of all of that, to be honest with you, at the moment. We're also being told by the government that they want us to build above need to get access to what they call the housing deal, which unlocks funding for brownfield land cleanup. So it's a very complicated picture, is all I can say. And we're trying to work through it as best we can with the overall discipline of reducing the Greenbelt take.
Well, thank you from the residents.
Okay. Paul, if you want to just, add a comment.
No, just on the ONS's data set and obviously the latest subnational housing projections. The latest methodology that the ONS used was taken over 2 census periods. And what you'll find from the methodology is in the middle of those 2 census periods, we had the economic crash in 2007 and 8, where house building and the construction industry actually came to a standstill. When you actually extrapolate those figures and look at somewhere like Cambridge, for example, Cambridge are being told at the moment that they need to demolish 8 homes a year to actually meet what's coming out of the subnational housing projections. So they are only projections, what's coming out of the ONS. What Andy said, and he's right, we're in this waiting period now where government are going to consult yet again on their objectively assessed housing need or their local housing need. And it's that number that'll be binding for the 10 districts of Greater Manchester. So we're doing all we can to absolutely do what Andy said, which is reduce the Greenbelt take. We're doing that through lots of different mechanisms. So Andy's Town Centre Challenge, for example, is all about building more homes in our town centres, doing urban density. We're taking very much an infrastructure-led approach to how we build homes. And obviously some of the money that we've got from government recently through marginal viability allocations and housing infrastructure allocations is all about trying to do infrastructure-led development within Greater Manchester. To date, we've been working to a figure of building 211,000 homes over the period of the spatial framework, which is a 20-year period. All of this is now up in the air because of obviously the population projections, the housing projections, and now we're waiting yet again for the government's consultation on the local housing needs. Again, you know, it was only in March of this year did we actually get a formal response from the government to the last consultation that they ran. So, as you can see, this is absolutely farcical from a kind of strategic planning point of view, because literally, you know, it's shifting sands all the time. We want to do a robust approach to strategic planning within Greater Manchester, and we'll do all we can to protect the Greenbelt within Greater Manchester, but we will have to meet housing need, because the worst of all of this is doing house building or planning through appeal. that costs local authorities an absolute fortune in legal costs, and I don't think any of us want to be in that position where we're paying out significant sums of money challenging planning application after planning application because we haven't got a 5-year land supply to meet our housing need. No one wants to be in that predicament, and we're doing our best to obviously challenge the government around some of this, but also make sure we've got a strategic plan for houses, but also for economic growth within Greater Manchester.
I think there's a comment from the lady just in the jacket there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
I just wanted to... Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I just wanted to clarify, GMCA have agreed to build 227,000 houses with government. Is that figure going to stand? That was from a release that I saw from Paul Dennett that was released in June this year. From GMCA.
From my point, no is the answer to that from my point of view, because that is now way above the projection that the gentleman referred to, and we don't believe that what we're being offered is quite as it was presented at the time. So, as far as I'm concerned, no, that figure is gone.
Do we have a rough idea of how many it's going to come down by? Ballpark figure. It's really, for all the reasons Paul gave, we feel we've been left in the lurch a bit, really, because we were working through this process in good faith, and all of a sudden the kind of goalposts were moved again with the government saying we're going to have a new methodology. We actually think it is to kind of bump the figure up, but we don't know. So we're kind of in a position here where we don't want to wait forever. As Paul said, we need a plan. I think it's really important for me just to stress that point. Without a plan, your green belt's at more risk. So we need a plan. And we've got to get this together. And the quicker we do it, the better. So we're all in that position. But if we go too early with a figure that then is nowhere near what the government comes up with, the plan that we come up with could be at risk of challenge. You see what I mean? We're really in it's a really impossibly difficult situation. But
is there an ETA on the next edition of the spatial framework?
It's linked to what we get, the intelligence we're going to get out of the government as to what progress they're making on their formula. If it's not going to appear anytime soon, we're going to go with our best judgment about where we should be building. If they say it's coming in November, it would be odd for us to go out and then all of a sudden this figure lands. So I'm sorry, it makes Brexit look easy, to be honest with you. So.
The last time you spoke about that it was end of November. Is that still the target, or has that moved? Or
I think we would still like to aim towards that, but it's some of this is out of our gift, because if all of a sudden out of nowhere this new formula was to land, then obviously we couldn't publish a plan that hadn't given any, as I said. So it is linked to the government's plans, and we need. Well, we're going to discuss this tomorrow, aren't we, Paul? And there's going to be latest intelligence from the government about where they're up to with their formula. They are otherwise engaged on other issues. So whether it's going to appear anytime soon, I honestly don't know. But what I can assure people is if it's going to take a long time, we are going to come out and say, no, we're coming back with a plan, which is our best guess of what Greater Manchester needs. So I know it sounds, it's a very messy situation. I can't put a better gloss on it than that, I'm afraid.
Okay, we've got a question from the lady in the purple jumper. I think it's about disabilities. It might be touching on transport again, I'm afraid, so get ready.
Okay.
Just like to ask your question, please.
It's not actually, it's about your combined youth authority. So, you might know, I did question on transport last year.
You did? Very successfully, I remember.
So how will you make sure that disabled people's voices will be heard in your youth combined authority?
Yeah, that's a really good challenge, Amber. We've set up a youth combined authority, and the remit they were given was to ensure that we have young people from a whole range of backgrounds as part of it. I don't have the figures to hand, but that was very much the remit they were given. But at the same time, I've also said that I want a disability advisory committee at the Greater Manchester level. And we're committed to bringing that forward quite soon. And I would want that organisation not just to represent older disabled people, but younger voices too. And I think you'd be a good candidate for that committee when we finally get it off the ground. But I hope, if devolution has a real strength, and you'll all have your views about how it's taking shape here in Greater Manchester, what it can do, if we do it right, is give people a much louder voice in the political process that they get through the normal run of events. That's the way I see it, that you can open up politics to voices from all parts of the community. You give them all an equal stake in the writing of our policies. And that's the principle we're trying to bring forward in Greater Manchester. And it was actually down to you, if I remember rightly, that got the issue of the scandalous failure of half of our, does everyone know this? Half of our train stations in Greater Manchester do not have wheelchair access. I mean, it's a scandal, but it was exposed on the media by Amber. And the whole point of these events is to kind of give a voice to people, to raise issues that often get neglected by the media, not by you, Matt, but often by the national media. True politician there, but buttering him up.
Okay, we've got...
She's seeing a lot of stuff on social media, particularly about the youth voice, but correct me if I'm wrong here, Amber, but she's saying actually it doesn't feel that inclusive, and it doesn't... Some of the issues that maybe affect young people like Amber maybe don't affect other young people, and they need a forum actually to thingy their issues.
I think that's a fair point, and we will take that back. I'm pretty certain in saying that amongst the members of the Youth Combined Authority, there are young people with disabilities of one kind or another. I'll have to go and just be sure that's the case, but I am pretty sure it is. But we want to keep changing the membership of the Greater Manchester Youth Combined Authority. And, as we do that, it's really important that we get, as I say, voices in representing all 10 boroughs, all communities, because that's what devolution should be all about. But, I take away the challenge, and I'll make sure that we rise to it.
I've got a question on policing from Luke. Where's Luke? Luke, just wait for the mic to arrive and then ask your question, please.
Hi Andy. I was in the unfortunate situation in July this year of being the victim of an assault in the city centre. Now, after the initial phone call to the police, my only interaction with them was on the live chat functionality when I was told that the case had been closed with no investigation or no contact from myself. I know there are other staff members here at the University of Salford that have had phones stolen on the Crescent just behind us, and I know of one particular case where it was reported, investigating, the case was closed within 1 hour of the crime taking place. So my question is really, with the current cuts to police funding resulting in resources being stretched and many of these minor crimes not being investigated, how can you ensure the police fulfil their vital role, but also maintain the confidence of the communities that they serve?
So, it's a very, very good question and an important question. I'm not introduced her yet, but the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime is with us this evening. I'll maybe ask Bev to say something as well. I mean, you say minor crimes, but I mean, I don't know the circumstances, and maybe the Chief Constable, would have something to add to this as well. But I would never say that when it involves violence against the person. I wouldn't. And as a principle, and I don't know, I'm just saying this because I'm giving you my instinctive reaction to what you've said, and there may be policing reasons as to why not every crime can be investigated in the way we would like because of the pressure on resources. But as a principle, we should always investigate, in my view, where it involves violence. Now, it won't be possible in every instance to bring those to a successful conclusion because of evidence and all the rest of it. But that should be our starting point as far as I would be concerned. But yes, Ian and his colleagues are under unprecedented pressure. I think the Chief Constable said this week that if the cuts continue, we'll be down to 1970s level of policing with 2018 levels of crime. And, things are giving in this scenario. Let's be honest, you can't cut the police and there not be consequences, and we're seeing some of those consequences. But when it comes to violence against the person, I wouldn't want that to be one of the consequences, whatever the level of policing. I don't know whether the Deputy Mayor wants to add anything to that.
I mean, Andy's right, and you're right as well, in that the increased pressure now with having lost 2,000 police officers and 1,000 PCSOs and police staff over the last 8 years, and levels of crime rising, levels of recorded crime anyway, the police are having to make really difficult decisions about what they can investigate and what they can take to fruition. But we're really clear that the priorities are those incidents that involve harm to individuals of one sort or another, and particularly vulnerable individuals. So I don't know the circumstances of your case, but that is the guiding principle in making some of those difficult choices. I would say as well that it isn't only the cuts to the policing budget from the government that are having an impact here. It's actually the cuts right across the board for many other sorts of people with different kinds of circumstances who end up with the police because there's nowhere else for them to go. The Chief Constable and I were at, we launched a project on Monday in which the Mayor's Office and the Health Service are paying jointly for mental health professionals to sit inside our call centres alongside the police officers who are taking the calls. Because so much of the police's time now is spent trying to rescue, basically, people with mental health problems, because the support services that used to be there in the community from the local authorities and so on aren't there anymore. So we're trying another way to relieve that pressure. So it is police budgets have cut, but it's right across the board. All those support services in the community have been devastated, and many people end up, as I say, at the police's door. But you're quite right to raise that issue, because going back to the main point, our guiding principle is we will go where a person has been hurt. So I don't know what happened in your case, but that is the way we're trying to work. If somebody rings up and I had my shed broken into, and the door was taken off, and there's no way the police could do anything about that. I didn't expect them to come out. They spoke to me on the phone. I didn't know who I was, but it was a nice test. But, you know, I completely accept that it's no point police going out to something like that, but something where an individual's been hurt or subject to violence, they really should be going to.
Thanks very much, Beth. I think we'll just move on to...
Matt, can I say a few things on that? Thanks.
Of course, yeah.
Sorry, I'm not going to turn my back on Andy, that would be very rude. The Home Affairs Select Committee published a report today, which if you go on their website, you can have a look at it. And it's a really important report called The Future of Policing, and the Home Affairs Select Committee is cross-party committee. It's very influential. And I would be able to if my phone hadn't gone off. I'm just going to read you. This is just from the summary. It says, without additional funding for policing, we have no doubt that there will be dire consequences for public safety, criminal justice, community cohesion and public confidence. We strongly recommend that police funding is prioritised in the autumn budget and the next comprehensive spending review. The current police funding model is not fit for purpose. It's time to stop kicking the problem into the long grass and recognise the true cost of policing. And honestly, I'm becoming weary of being an apologist for the cuts for the last 8 years in terms of the level of service that we are able to provide. And, you know, I've heard what Bev and Andy say, and I would love to go to everybody that might be threatened with violence or assaulted in a minor way. Frankly, we just can't do it. So we are ruthlessly assessing every day against a threat, harm and risk criteria those people that we are attending. And mostly it's those that are the most vulnerable in society are still getting a pretty good service from us. And Bev talked about mental health. 20% of my resources on a daily basis are taken up dealing with mental health. 17,000 cases last year of Section 136 of the Mental Health Act. We went to hospital with people. We're sitting up to 5 hours in A&E with people waiting to be assessed. So whilst we're doing some positive work, those are the sorts of things that we're having to do. And at the very top end, in terms of serious and organised crime, and the most serious crimes, you know, we are rated outstanding, and we're still doing a really, really good job. And where the public are feeling it, and this is where I feel it because I joined the police service to help keep people safe. It's a fundamental principle of the country that we live in. They're feeling it around all the sorts of things that you're describing this evening. And ladies and gents, it could get worse. You may have heard some of the stuff I've done in the media this week about the re-evaluation of the unfunded public sector pension schemes. That's a bill of £400 million for policing in the UK that we didn't know about until a couple of months ago. We knew about the public sector re-evaluation 2 years ago, but not the detail around the individual schemes. If that goes through, that's 8 million for Greater Manchester Police next year, 19 million the year after. Put that in perspective, 591 less officers, 1970s levels, or the entire budget that I've got for police and community support officers. So we are at a precipice when it comes to policing, and actually the Home Affairs Select Committee report is very good in terms of some of the recommendations that it makes. So I would just say have a look at that, and you'll see the sorts of difficult decisions we're having to make every day.
Okay. Just going to take, this is going to be a delight to the gentleman over here with a big EU flag.
I was going to say, we're going to have one question on Brexit.
We've had a few questions about Brexit come in from Facebook. Thanks for sending them in. One is from Katie, says, what can you offer to the many people who live in Salford and Manchester who do not want Brexit and may have to live with the consequences of it for their jobs and prosperity? And also, Joe on Twitter said, given there's no deal the UK can get now with the EU on leaving, that's better than what we already have. Would you support a people's vote? Stockport and Trafford already do.
Well, I've got a position, a careful position on this, and let me just outline it, because I understand the first question about people in Salford who want to stay, but I think I'm right in saying, Paul, that Salford as a whole voted to leave. So it's a difficult situation, and I've got to think about all of Greater Manchester, and 7 of our boroughs voted majority to leave, 3 to remain. And if anything, we're more divided, aren't we, than when the referendum took place. It's not a good, the quality of the debate at national level is still frankly appalling as far as I'm concerned. I believe the government, instead of grandstanding, the biggest, I've got a lot of time for Theresa May in one way, but appointing Boris Johnson to that role and David Davis, I mean, they got off completely on the wrong foot, and they've carried on grandstanding and point scoring, all the rest of it, and we've got into a situation where we've kind of burnt all of our bridges with Europe. And where are we at the moment? We should have just got on and done a kind of sensible bridge building exercise when they didn't do it. And here we are where we are today. So I've kind of really had to think about this, because Manchester for Europe and other organisations have been to see me to say, to make similar points as the ones that have just been made. I'll be honest with you, and I kind of remember very well the difficult experience of being in Leigh and in the run-up to the referendum, that obviously as an MP advocating a position that the constituency then didn't accept. I have real concerns about a second referendum, because the first one was challenging, but I think the second would be worse. And if we talk about threats to people who are vulnerable in the community, I think there would be real consequences, in my view. I don't want to over-dramatise it, but the second time out wouldn't be better than the first. I think it would be worse. And I think you have to think about that personally until you leap to that. I don't think it would bring the country back together. But here comes my however. If we are staring no deal in the face, that is actually worse, in my view, than the potential damage to the social fabric that would come with a second referendum. If we are on that cliff edge and about to crash out with no deal, that would cause profound damage to Greater Manchester's economy. It would damage people's jobs, families, livelihoods, businesses, the whole lot. We do 58% of our business with Europe here in Greater Manchester, 44% for the UK nationally. We would be harder hit by no deal than the rest of the country. And in those circumstances, and I appreciate it might not be what those in the audience who voted leave would want to hear, I would actually back a second vote, because I cannot in all conscience, as your mayor, say, oh, well, it's fine, we can crash out without a deal, we'll make it work. I don't think we will make it work. I think that the cuts to the police will get far worse. Ian told me a few weeks ago he doesn't even know what the arrangements would be for cooperation with other police forces. We don't even know how the airport would work. We can't do that. And I think in those circumstances, if the government have got us to the point where there's no deal, I think we've got to say, well, at that point you say, we've got to go back to the public on this one. Because crashing out with no deal, in my view, isn't more important to, at that point you've got to say, look, the country's got to come to its senses here. I still believe the right thing is a kind of sensible deal that maximises our relationship with Europe and our involvement in a customs union of some kind. But if that isn't doable, then I think, and if there's no deal, then personally I think that we should ask people again.
Okay, that's a carefully finessed answer from Andy. I'm going to ask a very, very simple question to you all here. How many people think there should be another referendum on this?
Can you differentiate between a referendum, a second referendum, and a people's vote?
I said another referendum just to keep it as general as we can. Well, a people's vote is what the campaigners call it.
Yeah.
So how many for another referendum? Okay, and how many would be against another referendum? I would say the room is leaning towards another referendum, but with the caveat that obviously isn't reference to the country. We have one final question. It's from David Jones. We're really tight for time, I'm sorry, but you could make a point at the end.
Right.
But,
hi, Andy, again.
I'm sorry, but because we're already overrunning. Okay, 30 seconds.
The only questions you put are from Remainers. As a medium.
Did you submit a leave a question?
I'm sorry, I thought this was a public forum.
I think we're going to get into a bit more of a debate than we've got time for. If we're going to, we can have a talk about that after we finish. If we just take our final question from David at the back.
Right, Andy, it's self-assessment time. You've been in post for some time now.
I think I'm going to score as highly as the Get Me There app if I'm not careful.
What mark out of 10 are you going to give yourself? Remember, it's self-assessment time. 0 means very poor. 10 is excellent. I've actually put my mark on the other side of this card.
Oh, dear me. Oh. Can we go to the gentleman in red's question? No. I'm going to, if I'm going to mark myself on effort, I can honestly say to you all, it's a 9, honestly. I am, yeah, well, thank you. But
I mean, was it not a 10?
Pardon?
Was it not a 10?
Well, that wouldn't be, I am working, I promise you. I thought I was signing up for a sort of quieter life when I left Westminster, but I kind of probably realised it wasn't going to be like that. But it is a demanding role, and it does consume, well, it's all consuming, but it's a brilliant role. I love it. In terms of achievement, well, it's a more middling score there, because I've achieved some of the things that I wanted to do. I'm getting a bed every night is I know it may not feel that to all of you at the moment, but honestly, from my point of view, that is a massive thing that is happening next week. It was the top thing I set myself. We've worked really hard on it, Paul and I and everybody. I'm getting somewhere on young people's travel. The GMSF is hard, but we're moving it in hopefully in the right direction. So it's a more middling score on achievement, and I feel a bit of frustration that. Oh well, thank you. You're very kind. Thank you, David.
Your own number?
I love.
Are you going to give us a number?
Yeah, well, I was 9 for effort. Or we say 5 or 6 for achievement. So I'll go somewhere in the middle. 7 maybe.
7
though. Yeah.
So how many agrees with Andy's 7? Yeah, got a few. And how about the 8 from the back?
Well,
okay.
you're very kind. I mean, the thing I just want to say is, I think, thank you all for coming, by the way, and thank you again to you, Matt, for doing it. I think all of these events kind of show a better way of doing things, don't they? I said to the gentleman again at the back before that however you voted on Brexit, I think we can all agree, can't we, that the London-centric approach to running this country has surely run its course, hasn't it? And the time has come for us to decide more for ourselves and debate things like this in this kind of forum about what we're going to do on policing or the GMSF or homelessness. I mean, that is surely one thing that I think we've got to bring people back together on and say, look, devolution is a big part of where we need to go from here. And, I'm to kind of pick up that question before, I'm really glad I left the Westminster system. I found it frustrating working within that on issues like Hillsborough and other things. I kind of saw myself that if they can ignore the North, they will ignore the North. And we've got to come at things a different way in this country. We do have to rebuild from the bottom up. We've got to build a healthier approach to politics where we debate the issues, as we have done tonight, rather than the point scoring and the personalities and all of that rubbish that comes with that national political scene. So I just want to carry on building this with you and involving people in what we're trying to do. We won't get everything right. I'm not saying that we will, and we'll have our differences. But I think, at least we're at the forefront of the change that needs to come across the country, as far as I'm concerned, where from the bottom up, people are more in control of the issues that matter to them. And I just want to thank you for being a part of this event tonight. I haven't kind of lapsed into my Morrissey impression, although actually Morrissey's not somebody to emulate these days, is he, with the kind of views that he comes out with. But, it's fantastic, and thanks to the university for hosting us, because they're great friends of everything that we're trying to do, and we really appreciate everything that Salford University is doing to help us on a range of agendas. So thank you all very much indeed for coming.
Yep.